All right. Let's start the message with prayer. Father, again, we come to you and we just dive into your word because it is this amazing, profound thought of God, where the God of the universe wrote down his thoughts and his actions on paper. And then you give it to us so that we can begin to think and act and align our minds and hearts with yours. Thank you for this incredible story that you give us where we see God come to meet with us, to look us in the eye and to experience life with us. And so as we study this word, pray that it wouldn't just be a story. It wouldn't be just more information. It would be this awe-inspiring perspective of the God of the universe, and that you would transform us through your word to align our minds and hearts with yours. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so in college, I had a double major. I majored in biblical studies, and then I also majored in psychology. And so I had a list of classes in psychology. And so at Bethel at the time, there was this old professor. He had tried to retire several times, and Bethel would keep calling him back because he was just kind of one of those wise old birds. His name was Dr. Muck. And he stood about this tall. And he was profoundly wise. And in one of the classes, it was coming around towards Christmas, and we were getting to the end of the semester. And he made this comment. He said, here's what's the interesting thing about Christmas, is that Christmas is this time of celebration and time of connection for families and time where we get together and we have all these festivities. And he said it's also the time of Great Depression. Psychologists have noted that during the Christmas season, that's when depression rises. That's when people struggle with their relationships the most. That's when they go to their therapist the most. Why is that? And he gave a list of reasons. He said, well, maybe it's the lack of sunlight. Maybe that's part of the cause. Maybe it's the fact that everybody's around going like, Merry Christmas, and it looks like everybody's having a great time and everybody is happy. And if your life isn't perfect, you start noting the difference, and so you go like, well, I must be more defective than everyone else. Or maybe it's the fact that Christmas has so many demands, like, I have to make it to this, and I have to make it to that, and I have to get the presents, and money is tight, and, and maybe that brings it on. Or maybe it's a combination of all of that. He said, we don't know for sure, but most likely what will happen is somewhere along the way in our lives, all of us will have those moments where we just aren't happy. And you might even label it as depression. And I thought about that because hope is just something we all need to know is there and available. Because when we live without hope, like everything crashes. There's no purpose for living. There's no purpose for moving forward. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about God's gift of hope during this Advent season. Okay, so I'm going to take us on a little adventure towards hope, and we're going to start in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. So we're going back to the beginning. Yes, and I've said this before, and I will say it again. We're going to take the scenic route to hope. We're not going to start right there. We're going to back up, and we're going to set some foundations. And the first foundation is Genesis 1, we'll be looking at verses 1 through 5. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, my parents would say, let's get in the car and let's just go for a Sunday drive. And we would drive through the countryside and just drive aimlessly to look at what's out there. And sometimes that's just kind of nice to not go with a whole huge agenda up front. But a lot of times on that drive, we found something really interesting to see and something fun and interesting that just brought enjoyment to life. And as we go through this tour, we'll point out some scenes along the way that will eventually help us understand hope a little more. Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And he separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Okay. So, you might be asking yourself right now, okay, so what does these verses have to do with hope? Technically nothing. But again, it's important scenery that will point us to hope here when we get to our destination. Now, here's one of the interesting scenes that I want to point out. We call the first book of the Bible Genesis, and the Jews do not. They call it Reshith, because they name their books by the first significant word in the book. And Reshith means in the beginning. And so that's kind of interesting that the Jews use a whole different system for naming their books. Now there's a second scene that I want to point out here. And the very first thing that God creates is light. And here's what bothered me about the whole creation story. God creates light, but there's nothing to give the light. The sun and the moon get made later. So where does this light come from? Where does this darkness come from? And the Jews had an interesting theory about this too. They came to the conclusion that because the sun and the moon and the stars hadn't been created yet, that light and darkness was more about good and evil than it was about physical light. And so God first created these concepts of good and evil before he created anything else. All right, let's drive a little further. We're going to go to Isaiah chapter 9, and we'll read verse 2. You know, as I think about it, we use the same symbolism of good and evil and light and darkness as the Jews. I'm assuming that the Bible has kind of influenced our whole way of thinking and our whole way of speaking. So, for instance, we say phrases like, be the light, right? I've even seen shirts with, be the light. Well, it doesn't mean like set yourself on fire or, shine physically like the sun. It's mean like be something good, do good and create light for other people. Give them a sense of hope and joy as well. Or we say that person is in the dark. And what we mean is like this person has no clue what's happening. Doesn't mean that they're standing out in the middle at midnight with no lights on. So we use that same symbolism. Another one is, it's always darkest before the dawn. There's kind of a proverb we quote each other, right? So when things feel incredibly hopeless, and it's really dark, emotionally, it gets really, really bad before it gets better. Before the light comes in and transforms it. And so it's always darkest before it gets better. And so we see this type of symbolism happening throughout the Bible, and Isaiah picks up on that kind of symbolism. He says, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned." And so there's this light versus darkness theme here. Isaiah is writing this prophecy about the coming Messiah, and he's talking about a group of Jewish people who were living in darkness. Now, does he mean that they're morally bankrupt? Does he mean that they are living hopeless? We don't know. They might be clueless. They might be uninformed. They might be living in desperation. They might be living without morals. It might be all of that, right? But Isaiah says that these people will suddenly be blinded by this incredible light. That the opposite of all of those traits is going to show up, and it's a blast of righteousness and hope for these people. And so that's his prediction. And the Jews looked and said, this is a prediction about the Messiah. And so they're waiting for this Messiah who's going to bring hope and righteousness and light to the whole world, right? And so that's kind of this image or this picture that I want us to notice as we kind of meander our way towards where we're going. And let's go to this scene. We're in John chapter 1. We'll start at verse 1. So I don't know about you, but there are times when there's this feeling of despair. When it feels like your heart has been weighed down with 1,000 pounds. And you just feel dead inside. Now, people who fight depression oftentimes describe depression as a heavy black blanket that just covers over them and pushes them down. Like they are dragging this blanket wherever they go, and it's everything they can do to drag this thing with them. But this blanket is completely over them, and there's no light, and it weighs so much they can hardly move. And so this sense of despair can be devastating, it can be daunting, it can be absolutely debilitating because of the weight that people have to carry. And so it immobilizes people and keeps them from moving in life. And obviously, hope is the antidote, right? Hope is a sense of light and joy and motivation. And hope promises that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And it's one of the greatest gifts that anyone could ever have in order for their life to move forward. And now, this is what the Apostle John says in chapter 1, starting at verse 1. He says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Did you see what John did there? He names his book "In the Beginning," Reshith. The Jewish readers who read this book instantly understood exactly what John was doing with the very first word. This is the book of Genesis. Well, this is the book of Regenesis. And do you see the first thing that's created in his book? Actually, it's not created. It's something that exists even before creation. This light was with God. This God was God. And this God goes out to us to light us up. He adds Isaiah's prophecy to the mix to make sure that we understand who this light is and what this light is about. And so the Jewish readers who read the very first few words of the book of John understand, because they're networking all of these Old Testament prophecies right into John 1 through 5. And so from the very first word, John has communicated to his Jewish readers where he's going with his whole book and what this is all about. This is all about Jesus recreating who we are as people. He's relating himself as light to our darkness, and he's changing how we relate to each other, how we relate to him, to God, and giving us light when we have no light at all. So John is actually a master storyteller, because in just a matter of a few words, he summarizes the Old Testament prophets all the way back to the very first words of Genesis and mixes that all in. And then he adds some interesting twists along the way as he writes his book. So John uses the word logos, the Greek word that means the thought or the reason of God. The thought or the reason of God was with God, but it was also God, but it is also separate from God. And this spoken logic has come to us as a physical baby to live with us, to be with us. This physical logic has always been with God, but it's also been separated from God. And this physical logic is recreating everything that he comes in contact with. He is the essence of life, and he hands life to us. And so from this point on, the book of John is all about how the spoken logic speaks God's truth and uses God's truth to transform people's lives, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And so the Jewish readers read through this Old Testament grid of information who this Messiah is and what he was about. Jesus is light, he is life, and Jesus always wins over darkness. So usually this is what happens in a sermon. Pastors do this thing where we brag about the hope of God, right? We talk about how hope can go into our lives and transform us. And for those who struggle with depression, they become more depressed. They think to themselves, okay, if God is the God of hope, if this light that comes to earth is supposed to transform my life, well, then I must not be a good Christian, because it doesn't feel like hope to me. And I'm still struggling, and so there's got to be something wrong with me. And that's where we're headed for Romans chapter 8, starting at verse 18. Because here's what I don't want. I don't want this concept of God giving us hope to be like this delusional picture that paints a picture like, oh, now that Jesus is in your life, everything's going to be okay. You know, you'll be healthy, wealthy, and wise, and there you go. Because life is difficult. And so we're not going to live in denial that our struggles today still exist. However, what I want hope to be is for us to be absolutely clear about the struggles that we still have. And that hope takes us through those struggles and gives us a sense of hope and purpose even though life isn't perfect right now. Because our present reality is that none of us are happy all the time. None of us has perfect relationships. None of us get the miracles that fix us physically, emotionally, spiritually all the time. And none of us experience emotional and physical healings that make us live forever, right? This is still a fallen world. But even in our difficulties, there can be a sense of hope. And that's why the Apostle Paul writes Romans chapter 8, starting at verse 18. This is what he says. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption into sonship, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we are saved. See, the Apostle Paul has this realistic perspective. He's saying that in our hopelessness, it helps us see the full measure of our hope. Hopelessness actually points us to the depth of our future hope. That our struggles are actually an indication that helps us really understand how good it's going to be. He says, our life is frustrating here, even as Christians, but that frustration helps us understand the promise of a future glory. It leaves us in a world of suffering right now, but someday, sometime, we are going to experience that hope, even though our suffering right now can be immense. And so the Apostle Paul encourages us to use our suffering as an inspiration for hope for the future. And here's essentially what he's saying. Take your deepest, darkest depression, your biggest struggle, your greatest fear, and now measure the depth of your despair. Measure the width of the devastation. Measure the length of its debilitation and the weight of that overwhelming depression. And then use those same measurements to measure the depth of your future joy, the width of your future peace, the length of your future freedom, and the weight of grandest glory with God. Because as deep as you will go into the depths of despair is also the height of the glory that you'll someday experience. The harder it is, the more you can understand how great it will be. It is because of our struggles that we look to our future glory, our future hope, and we stand in front of God as His children, and we know that as deep as and as bad as it can be, we can turn and flip that over and see the height of how good it will be for the future. Because Christianity not only explains our future hope, but it also explains why we don't have all of that now. You see, what happened was when sin came here, and we were the ones who started it, right, as humans, as bad as it is, we're the ones who caused it, we're the ones who made it happen, and we live here for now. Because Christianity could do some kind of pie in the sky, everything's going to be perfect, the reason that you aren't happy is because you just haven't claimed God kind of theory. But that's not what Christianity teaches. Christianity says this place is defective. And we get a dose of God's glory here. We get a dose, just little samples of hope now. But this is not our final home. This is not our destination. We aren't just trying to make it till death. It's actually death and complete destruction that transforms us into an incredible hope. And so I don't want to project this false image or this false hope that everything is perfect right now. No. The Bible is clear that we don't get that here. That's for our future. And as bad as it gets here, it's going to be nothing compared to how awesome it will be in the future. And it assures us that God does love us, that he is able to rescue us, that he does have the wisdom we need in order to move through life, which means he sees us through our present difficulties. And he uses those difficulties to point to us to the fact that there is a future hope. There is a place where there isn't suffering. But right now, honestly, it can be frustrating, can't it? It can be a struggle. And Paul says, as much as frustrating as it is right now, yeah, that's nothing compared to what you're going to experience in your future hope. We groan under the weight of hopelessness here, and it feels like maybe we've been immobilized from experiencing everything that we're hoping for. But that isn't true in the future. So if you're feeling frustrated, if you wish things were different, then you're just like all of creation, because all of creation is frustrated with how things are right now. What it wants is that sense of joy and hope that is promised for our future. Now, in the second half of verse 24, Romans, it says, "But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, well, then we wait patiently." The Apostle Paul says we do get this dose of hope right now, right? And for that, we don't have to continue to wait. But there is a portion of our hope that we don't get here. You know, we have certain aspects of our hope right now. The Spirit of God lives inside of us. He speaks to us. We have this possibility of being transformed, of becoming more and more like God. And, you know, I was trying to think of how to illustrate this, and I was thinking to myself, you know, one of the things that I've been hoping for and wanting for the future was a Maserati MC20 Cielo. Now, Cielo, by the way, means sky, because the top is actually clear so you can see the sky. Yeah. Now, I want to assure you, I'm not an unreasonable man. I'm open to any color. So, I wouldn't want to be demanding or anything. But I was hoping to get one for Christmas. And I was thinking, if you all chip in together, I could take it off my wish list. Right? Because once I have one sitting in my driveway, then I don't have to wish for it anymore. And I was thinking there might be some Good Friday prices that you can take advantage of about this time. So, once it's parked in my driveway, I don't have to wish for it anymore, right? So you take it off your wish list. It's when you don't have what you want that you're wishing for more. This life leaves us with a wish list, doesn't it? And because we have a wish list, we can think to ourselves that God doesn't love us, that he doesn't care. And so our present reality is that we do have a dose of hope. We have connection with God. If we've accepted Jesus, the big present is coming, right? Right? It's not parked in our driveway, but we got the card saying it's coming. And so we can take it off our wish list. Our future is absolutely certain that we will live in the presence of God in this place of freedom and joy. And he's given us this hope. Now, is it sitting in the driveway right now? No, it isn't. And so a certain amount of that is faith, right? We have to believe that God is faithful and that we have the card, but it's not sitting in the driveway, but it is coming. And so as we struggle now with our Toyotas and Kias and Fords and, right? As we struggle now with what isn't perfect, we still know that it's coming. And so God gives us this deep, profound hope that our present sufferings are not even worth comparing. I mean, we will look back, we'll stand in the presence of God and we will go like, you know that one time when I was so discouraged? That one time when life just seemed to be eating me up and I could not see any way out of it. Yeah, well, that ain't nothing compared to where I am now. And so, wherever you are in life, whether Christmas is awesome and life is golden, or life is a struggle, for whatever reason, there is this sense of hope that we have that carries us through and gives us a hope for the future. So this is the time of the service where I give you this moment to just close your eyes, connect with Jesus, talk to him about the gift of hope, what you love about it, what you're struggling with, and just take this moment to connect with him, and then I'll close this in prayer. Jesus, today we come in front of you just to thank you for the gift of hope. That when everything feels like absolutely hopeless, like there is no possibility for a future, that even in those times, we have a deep and profound hope that we will stand in your presence, that life will be perfect. There will be no pain. There will be no suffering. There will be only joy and eternity and love and grace and goodness in your presence. Thank you for that kind of hope that cannot be diminished or taken away, and that we can carry that hope with us, that there is this light at the end of the tunnel, that as we walk through those times of despair, where life seems so dark, that there is still hope. There is still a future, and that it is guaranteed. And for that, we thank you and praise you. Thank you for your goodness. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for coming. Have a great weekend.